So people are coming in. Somebody in the lobby said that it's fun here and
So let us continue. The first part of the presentation, for those of you who were not here with, we spoke about the objectives and key results and how they affect the testing department and how they're formulated at the company level. I understand that among you, most of you are not heads, maybe even the absolute majority are not leads, seniors or juniors, and you find it more interesting how to live with all of this and how to grow. Understanding the company objectives, well, it's great. You understand that they want to sell more. I don't know, something else. But what's in it for me? I shall try to answer this simple question in the second part of my presentation, and maybe outside it will be less of a connection with OKR. This is an asset for those of you who did not attend the first part, and a bit lost that we're moving away from the OKR to people and to parts less related to the previous part. The first part of the presentation was dedicated to OKR, what it is all about, and I shared some practical advice which helped me once. Okay. Also, here we had four superhero skills, and I shared what needs to be done to live with that. And now, let's look at it with the eyes of the tester. See, those of you who attended the previous conference, we here at my previous presentation on the ideal test manager, maybe you watched it on YouTube. Anyway, the idea was to become an ideal test manager, you need to have a combination of three factors. Absolute must: people management, then strategic management, something that we spoke about in the first part. It's not only strategic test management, but strategic management. How testing and quality can affect the success of the whole company. And finally, the operational or tactical test management. This is more like a project management level, SQA master. And then the question, what is missing here in this ideal test manager picture? Great. It means that you have been to my presentation. Yes, the letter T is missing. Exactly. Something, your deep and profound technical expertise. This is a must-have. All other three levels, people management, strategic management, tactical test management, you can have it at a more profound level and know some basic stuff about it, but the technical expertise cannot be underrated. Onwards, I'm going to speak in greater detail about that. First of all, what can we expect from our test manager? First, we need to be able to talk to him. We expect some feedback from him, and also we expect some career growth and development. In other words, what we're doing is helping us develop as a specialist. This goals, your goals, and objectives and expectations from the manager coincide with what I mentioned in the first part of my presentation: conversations, feedback, and recognition. What we do correctly and what we do wrong, and recognition. At any level, whoever you are, be it a tester, intern, test lead, head of the testing department, you will still expect all these three things from your manager, who might no longer be so deep on testing as yourself. In fact, the first step from the tester, we're moving down. Well, we might not become test lead right away, or maybe we strike a lucky strike and become one, but sometimes you're told, first, train yourself on juniors, mentor a person, onboard him, and What is important here? Here you can manifest your personal skills, ability to explain, ability to listen and hear. If you own the skills insufficiently or sufficiently, but for you it is physically strenuous. For instance, easier for you to either write your code for auto testing or test it without communicating with anyone. This is also okay. In that case, you can forget about mentoring. It doesn't mean that it's an end of your career growth, and that's it. You can continue to be a high class technical specialist and continue to develop your T vertical. And with OKR, you will continue to be an asset for the company because both the project managers and maybe department managers know that you are great technical specialists. They will approach you for advice on architectural that and other on coverage and other things.
So you don't have to become a lead necessarily. And perhaps you've come across in your work that this dude is really dope, but you don't want to come up to him for advice because he might uh, not be too willing to share. I'd better approach this one and he will really tell me how it's done without telling me to take a hike. Well, this is where the first bifurcation comes. If we take a more generalized language, you become a technical lead of the team and you might be faced with tasks. I mean, which one of you has all four tasks to take care of? And which one of you has three tasks? So at least one. You have at least one of those, right? As a test lead. So you can manage people as team leaders. You can carry out decomposition, planning, and so on. This is what you might do, but not necessarily. In big companies, there's people management, resource management, and the technical management is carried out by your test lead. That might well be the case. So, what's the first hiccup? The first hiccup is if your colleague knows that you are a test manager, you know everything about QR, but still he is going to bring to you simple questions. How this can be done? What does this case test does? So you should be ready. You should read up books on 400 questions. You need to possess required expertise to be able to answer these questions. So technical examination is also very important. Like I told you, you need to adjust your plan. You collect some ideas in retrospect. You might act as a group facilitator. You collect and implement those ideas. And you review and analyze what worked and what didn't work. So you can switch from one area to another. You can continue to be a top-rate technical expert, or you could join the managerial staff. If, if you want to develop into the managerial level, you need to look for self-regulating processes and procedures. This way you won't have to uh, micromanage all the time, asking people around, what did you do? Did you ask that guy how this should be done? So try to look for easiest procedures. And I understand that not everyone has this possibility, but still try working with people who are proactive. In other words, they don't sit and wait to be pushed around. And like I told you, look for self-regulating processes because they also work. As a technical lead, especially when you are a tester, you may never have to do with coding, but still, you need to be aware of the overall architecture or add-on tools added to your system, how they interact, what bugs are there. So this is not only within the purview of developers and development lead. This is also something that the test lead should know about and find his bearings around. You don't enter the field of management per se, but still you have to build your relationships with your employees. You develop their development plans, and to avoid making mistakes made earlier and to really learn your lessons, you need to explain to others that documentation is also important. You need to collect documents and records, and documentation hinges upon many parameters. It's up to you, and it depends on what kind of processes and procedures you apply. I will not delve into this any further. Whenever a newbie comes in, this is a fresh blood and a new perspective, so always collect feedback from newbies. Even if a guy is not as experienced as you are, he might join your team, and in the first 2 to 3 months, he might tell you a lot based from his perspective, because his eyes are very keen to things that you are pretty used to. And as for delegation, if you don't want to turn it into a micromanager, you will have to delegate some powers. And key results are a good way of understanding it. One might say, if there are some key results and a person achieves them, that person might tell you how he did it, and if he didn't, he will tell you what prevented him from reaching those goals. Perhaps you don't need so many technical details, and if your goals are well formulated and visible for everyone, you shouldn't even bother to go into such a level of detail. And another piece of advice that I typically give is as follows. You don't need to be an consummate optimist, always looking at the on the bright side. When someone brings you news, and even if it's not so good news, but you don't have time to be worried or upset about it, you need to focus on what needs to be now, what needs to be done now to rectify the situation. Regarding the team, if you run a team, one team, that team faces a set of tasks, and one team, a set of goals. If you run a team composed of people from different teams, like manual and automated testing teams, you need to analyze and figure out what valuable project they deliver from the perspective of the company.
So from the company standpoint, you can look at, conditionally speaking, about testing as a separate project, which includes some sub-projects, and you decide for yourself which ones are worthwhile and which need to be focused on. So some type of testing could be numerous. Maybe some additional teams need to be organized for this type of testing, like for performance testing or usability testing, and it will be done by your testers at the basic level for all projects. Then here, then you can start looking at it. Consequently, you decide on the personnel needs of your organization. It's good if you have a plan for a year or 2 years ahead and you understand very well that in 2 years' time you can develop a good usability test, for instance. First with this project, then that project, and then somebody approaches you like with specific set of goals, but you missed the window and you fail to train all your people well enough to say that they're great in usability, for instance. And in that case, you will have to find out how to find those specialists from outside and what needs to be done further on to cultivate your own person in-house, because you do it in-house development. It motivates the whole team, because when they see that if he can do this, then I can do it as well. That is why the technical managers enjoy greater level of respect, because they see they did that, they did this, they have grown, and maybe when they go up, they might take me as a deputy, and that will be a career lift for me. Also, aside from the team management, of course, there will be some unpleasant questions when interacting with other departments, because you want to release new features, but you have a technical obligation that you have to find out yourself. This is not just a nice phrase. Being like development team lead, you as a testing team lead, you will help him. In my case, the development team lead is at the same level as the testing team lead, and we help each other what kind of technical backlog we have. They look at the architecture, I look at the defects of books about that. What I mentioned in the first part of the presentation, that we need to analyze the price or quality to price or value ratio, and then explain to the management why it is so important. And once again, tell you why this vertical test combination test architecture is important. You get obsolete, and engineering wise it is understood that if you're not well versed in some technical aspects, you become obsolete. Here, of course, you can decide to go into administration and personnel management only. It's also good, but it's a risk, because this way you negate the technical component and continue to be a people manager or operational test manager. And perhaps you are also linked to this company only. Well, company still has such need. You fill in this gap, quite a narrow gap, and it's quite good for you for a while. But when you either want to change the company, it will no longer be enough to fill in this gap, and then we'll have to be much better versed person, including the technical competence. Besides, it would be much difficult to deceive you this way, because some people are quite deceitful to tell you that this work can take 2 months. As a tester, if you're technically proficient, no person can come to you and tell you that 10 test cases need 2 weeks to write, for instance. Of course, a person might have some other work. You can ask additional questions and find out why they need 2 weeks for 10 test cases. If in by test case you understand the scenario for 30 steps. Still, maybe in this case, one test case can take a day. But still, it's very unlikely. Now, what about the team? What is changing here in terms of the project management components? Agile methods are still relevant here. Agile principles remain to be true here. Nothing is happening to them. Besides, each engineer and tester has 10 productive weeks per quarter, and more likely than not, if it is productive week, they might not even have 10 weeks because there are all sorts of vacation periods, business trips, and so on. And as a team lead, you must dedicate some hours of your time. 20% would be great if you manage to dedicate it to training of the team, application of some new methods. 20%, I would be more than happy for you if you manage to do that. To be honest, this way you will be able to stand on the stage and tell everybody how you achieved that. It's great. But you must always remember about the time to hone your acts and find this theme for the team and fight for this time with your management. This is your ultimate goal. And to be able to say no when the work is close to completion. When you're told that let's do this, and that, and then there will be bug and regress and nothing else will work. But it looks like everybody, you acquiesced to everything, but it didn't work at the end. Now about conflict management. Of course there will be conflicts. I like the phrase that consensus is great, majority of votes is great, but what to do in this situation? This is a question for you. For instance, in your team you have 5 persons, 3 persons are saying yes, 2 persons say no. What decision should be made? The right decision. Then which decision is right? I might be among those who say no or among those who say yes. The third decision, how the third decision can be applied here. Ask for an expert from outside. Okay, now outside will be, we'll say 4 will be yes, 2 no. Now will be majority yes, minority no. Can you repeat that? Based on the characteristics, yes, you can formulate some characteristics. Okay, you can discuss with those people who say no, find out why they say no, find out what kind of fears or concerns they have. Maybe when they voice their concerns, there will be no longer 2, 3, or maybe 1, 4. They might convince others. So it's not as easy as it sounds. Even in case of the majority of votes, it doesn't work like that. What does it mean to be kind and compassionate, humane, but at the same time, there's a good word, nice. When you're nice, when you're cute and everybody likes you, you're a nice person who can say no. You can say, no, we're not doing this, or we cannot promote you to test lead because of 1, 2, 3 reasons. It doesn't mean that you're such an evil person who is telling everybody no. No. Kindness is not to say yes to everyone. With a group, with the team groups, there's some technical level starts. Of course, you cannot have all the competences here. I understand that you cannot read it well, but this slide can be viewed on SQA 124. This is my presentation. I looked at it in greater detail. This is your test component. I've subdivided in testing attach. The vertical part and the horizontal part are the areas which you need to be aware of, like product management, strategic management, personnel management, and team lead. You can look at it and use this matrix, or perhaps use something else. So this is the presentation from the 24th conference. It can be better seen here. Even for me, it's hard to see what is written there. Now you're responsible for cultivating and bringing up other QA leads. You're doing it not only through your example, but through mentoring and coaching. You delegate some tasks. Sometimes you delegate easy tasks, or Conversely, you delegate some hard to do tasks or complicated tasks that come often, and by delegating more complicated and challenging tasks, the higher level of delegation, this way you gradually train the test lead. First, you do easy tasking when you go into micromanagement, then you just tell them do this, and they explain how they did it, and you move to more complicated tasks and you delegate them. It's better to do it based on examples, serve by example. And here you might have some business interests and some technological interests. This goes back to the question in the first part, the last question in the first part, what to do, how to do the tug of war game between the product features and engineering backlog. Maybe I will repeat what I said previously. Try to read Martin Fowler's article, one of the most recent ones. I don't remember the title, about the dependency of internal technical backlog, as the Fowler, as Fowler calls it. When you resolve it this way, you help the product to develop features faster.
So, for example, if you say that the technical duty is something that help technical debt, it might help you develop the product and to market it faster. And the innovation and technologies, you might look up something new, something groundbreaking. I think I'll go back to this slide. How long does testing require in terms of time? I like this question from the last conference, and I'm sure you might have this question now. How long should it take to test a product? It really depends. In my case, testing takes up to 20% of my time. When I was the test lead, at least a third of my time with a team 8 men strong. Now my team is 15 men strong. I myself don't do testing as often, but my advice is if you run a team, expend effort to some activities like making presentations at a conference, write articles. I mean, you should have this dimension in your work when you reduce the amount of testing you do. Managing a team and team health measurements and indicators. The frequency of releases is certainly a key indicator. If your releases don't come too often, I understand there are certain specificities, there are big systems of systems. I worked with smaller teams, but for relatively small teams, the frequency of releases should be as much as possible. In other words, you should be able to release as often as it is necessary. You need to have the code ready, coverages ready, and as for frequency of malfunctions, they could occur in the CPU. So the conclusion we might make is that as the test team leader, you should be familiar with how your team works, what objectives it pursues, and if there are several teams involved, they should operate in sync, having the corporate vision in mind. Regardless of the management system, you will interact with people. It may sound trite, but it's easier to work with your subordinates than getting other team leads to agree with you. You should apply critical thinking of a tester and look at things and methods that would help you boost the system. like I told you about the dooming principles in the first section of my presentation. So let's have those questions. Thank you. I have one more t-shirt to give out. So one presentation, two t-shirts. I wanted to ask a question for the first and second portions. Does the test lead really need OKRs? I understand the test lead need to deal with the uh, subordinates OKRs. There are departmental OKRs. So should the test lead have OKRs of his own? Does that involve me being at the very top of testing? But typically, test lead has someone to report to. If it's a small company, the test lead is at the top. So, from my perspective, the objectives are really required, and I guess it's more for the testing department director how to divide the objectives into sub-objectives. From my perspective, QA lead tests stuff 20 to 30% of the time, and in the remaining time, he interacts with other people on the objectives that they pursue. Hello, I'm Olga, and here's my question. Can you combine two roles? One involving testing, being a test lead, and the other one is being an operations manager. What I mean is that there is a development team, and you are offered 25% as an operations manager, and the remaining time will be devoted to testing team. As always, I try not to theorize too much. I used to be a manual QA and automated QL, and the split was 50-50. Before lunch, I did it manually. After lunch, I wrote scripts. It was very challenging, and it's difficult to make your brain work differently over lunchtime. This is the first hitch you might snag. You might be running retrospectives, be a QA manager, and you also run a team or several teams, and it's becoming more and more difficult because you have to do the switching from one job to another. And I suppose test leads shouldn't be given a lot of work to do. I mean, it should be done gradually. And if he succeeds, you can add some project management functions to him or customer support. I mean, easy does it. A test lead comes in, there is one objective. Then he is in charge of a team. He learns how to do it, a third task could be delegated to him.
Меня зовут Сергей.
My name is Sergey. I have two questions.
Касательно слайда, то, что вашу компанию убивает проведение аттестации среди
The
сотрудников,
first one is that
это пишут в докладе, да,
your
это
team gets killed when
чем постановка
team
целей
certification takes
сотрудника
place.
по факту отличается от аттестации, если ему либо
What is the
надо
difference between task
ставить так
testing
называемый индивидуальный план
and
развития, либо
certification?
компания применяет
I mean, there is an
сертификацию
individual
исключительно по
development plan
факту
for 3 months.
проведения
If you
аттестации,
fail,
либо
it's
получается,
kind
что
of internal
повышение индивидуального
exam or
Вопрос
certification.
заключается в том, что
So, in
с
other
одной
words,
стороны есть вот
on the
эта
one hand,
аттестация, которую
there
вы
is
не делаете,
certification that
а с
Doming
другой, как
advises
бы все
against,
равно оценивая человека, вы
And by assessing or evaluating someone, you still evaluate that person. So you see a contradiction here. Certification according to Derming and attestation or certification as is.
Хороший вопрос. То есть, ну, я попытаюсь.
It's a very good question. My answer to this would be that certification is something you will run into at a certain point of company's growth. If your company is 1,000 people strong, it is possible to do without a certification. I am talking about turquoise organizations. But if it's a small company where 20 people do testing, qualification or certifications uh, don't are not really necessary. Certification is replaced with supplementary roles or functions that each member of the team might take up. And John Doerr advises to distinguish between certification and OKR certification, but it doesn't always work. So we shouldn't put it like you do this and you will have $100 extra. It's not about maximizing profits. Perhaps you're doing something not uh, something that has even more value, but in the long run it will bring you more profit. So I wouldn't draw a direct correlation here. It's more about distribution of roles. In the big setup, it's impossible, I would say. I remember there were some questions from this area.
Здравствуйте. Расскажите, пожалуйста,
Hi,
если в компании около
if
200
a
человек,
company
это
of
начиная, наверное, с
200
руководителя
people
до
strong,
директоров, в какой момент,
excluding
то есть начиная с руководителя,
management,
если нужно
from what
разобраться и
level
разобраться с тем, что
should you
делают
really
другие
come to
отделы и команды
grips and be
внутри
knowledgeable
компании?
about what other teams do within a company? Thank you for the question. At what level, you ask? At the level that you mentioned, you shouldn't know. It doesn't pay to know how many scripts have been written by how many people. You need to be aware of quality parameters that the entire team has delivered. How many bugs have been missed, for example. It really depends on the structure. If you have 20 sub-projects, it will be hard for you, to weigh in on each project. Plus, you will require sub some managers for intermediary functions. But I guess it comes down to how many people can you manage at a time. My personal opinion is that you can run 4 to 7 people at a time. If you monitor them closely, four people, I believe, is the best estimate. If it's over 7, you need another layer of mentors or leads, and they will be overseeing those below them.
Андрей, такой вопрос. Скажите, пожалуйста, вот
Andrei,
вы в первой части своего доклада советовали там
in the first
собираться
part of your
полгода
presentation, you
и
suggested
собираться
gathering at
неделю
least once a year,
проводить
once in 6 months,
мероприятия. А вот
uh,
в QA
to
как
go
часто
over
можно собираться со своими людьми,
objectives.
которыми управляют? Есть ли, допустим, один
And
день
what
там в
about
неделю, когда вы
QA?
собираетесь?
How often should they be meeting? That's a great question. I remember that we used to have meetings once in 2 weeks, but then a person started to grow to the lead level. I had the need to meet them every week. So my company arrived at a setup where leads were required, so I started meeting them every week. I allow more autonomy to my leads, but at least once in 2 weeks. That's a must have. Maybe once in a week. Last time around, you told us that company goals are required for the departments to interact better and all the way down. Uh, Does it make sense to apply this system at one unit level? Well, we started applying OKR at the company level, so I have no experience in if in one team or one unit you have OKR, or and in another team